We pause now for a moment to see how far we've traveled and where the rest of our journey lies. The Jordan flows out of the Sea of Galilee, continues south, and with Jericho and Jerusalem to the west, enters the Dead Sea. From Galilee to the Dead Sea is about 65 miles direct, but the river meanders so that it traverses at least 200 miles. Let us take up our journey again. The Jordan leaves the Sea of Galilee as a much wider river, very different from the rippling stream that emerged from the springs of Dan. Travelers stop at the riverside to water their camels and to rest. The ever-present herdsmen with their flocks make their way along the road, always in search of fresh pastures. The sheep and goats are mingled together, just as they must have been in the time of Christ, for he referred to the separating of the sheep from the goats at the day of judgment. In the surrounding country, we find fertile agricultural land farmed on large-scale modern lines. The grain is reaped by a big combine harvester, which cuts the corn, threshes it and bags it as it moves along, casting out the bales of straw as it goes, while a single man at the wheel guides its powerful caterpillar tracks. Compare this with the reapers in a neighboring farm, still using the ancient sickle, as they did thousands of years ago, when Ruth, the woman from Moab, gleaned the ears of the corn which the reapers left behind. About 8 miles south of Galilee, the Jordan is joined by its main tributary, the Yarmuk, which enters through a steep and rugged gorge. Where the two rivers flow together, the waters have been dammed, making a large, shallow lake which controls the flow of water. From Yarmuk to Jericho, the Jordan is almost inaccessible by road, but from overhead we see the great bends in the river and the malarial swamps with an unhealthy tangle of thorns, tamarisks and willows on either side. The valley is almost deserted. Beyond the swamps on each side are wastes of arid land, ridged by the winter rains and rising to barren mountains. This is the true wilderness, so often mentioned in the Bible, almost uninhabited and bare, haunted by scorpions, lizards and snakes, and ruled by the blazing sun. Through this type of country, the early Hebrews passed on their way from Egypt to Palestine. Only brigands and bandits lived here, hiding out amongst the mountains and descending to plunder unprotected travelers. Christ referred in his parable of the Good Samaritan to a traveler who was robbed and beaten on a journey from Jerusalem to Jericho. This is actually part of the Jerusalem-Jericho road. Today, it can be used by motors. The traffic is moving up the hill in the direction of Jerusalem. Jericho stands 5 miles from the Jordan at the foot of the mountains of Judea. All that remains of the city round whose walls Joshua and the Israelite army marched is the mound of Tel Es-Sulta. Here the trumpeters marching round the walls sounded a fanfare. The walls collapsed, the army entered and massacred the people. Archaeologists have found traces of the flattened walls and of the destruction of the city by fire. Jericho gets its water from the walled pools of Elisha, fed by springs flowing from the earth. Here, Elisha the prophet is said to have healed the bitter water miraculously so that the people of Jericho could drink in safety, water their cattle, and irrigate the soil. These waters still flow through the town in roadside channels. In Jericho, Christ gave blind Bartimaeus his sight, and Zacchaeus, the unpopular chief tax collector, climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus over the heads of the crowd. These barren mountains may be where Christ resisted the temptations of the devil after fasting in the wilderness. Leaving Jericho, we first cross the stretch of arid land that borders the valley and then return to the Jordan. Across the river lie the plains of Moab, where Joshua camped before leading the Israelite army to the capture of Jericho. In this area, John the Baptist began his ministry baptizing the people in the narrow and sluggish waters of the river. This is the shrine built by Christians to commemorate the baptism of Christ. The Jordan now drags its way through the last few miles of its course to the Dead Sea, 1,300 feet below sea level. The Dead Sea is completely landlocked. Evaporation in the hot sun causes its level to remain constant. The water of this sea contains 10 times as much salt as that of other seas and oceans of the world. It is becoming more saline every day as the Jordan pours in. The salt poisons the soil. All vegetation in the area is stunted and parched. It is a wilderness. No fish can live in the Dead Sea. This is the region where the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah stood until they were destroyed by some terrible catastrophe. According to the Old Testament story, Lot's wife, fleeing from the doomed cities, looked back at the destruction of her home and was turned into a pillar of salt. Today, the salt is reclaimed from the sea and manufactured into chemicals and fertilizers. It is shoveled into trucks for removal to the factory, where it is treated and transformed from the salts which poison the earth into others which make the earth fertile. Ezekiel the prophet looked forward to the day when the waters would be healed and the countryside fertile again. For thousands of years, from Mount Hermon, through Lake Hula, Sea of Galilee, town, village, plain and wilderness, the River Jordan has poured its waters into the Dead Sea. During a final look at the southern end of the Jordan Valley, we recall that the region of our journey saw the birth of Christian civilization.